Hi, my name is Marty Anderson. I'm on the faculty at Babson College. I teach extended enterprise management, which is a combination of strategy and technology in a heavily global context. Before I started working at Babson, I spent about 20 years in global turnaround work, and you'll see some of the perspective from that work and also what I teach today. I've been asked to show you a sample of what we do here at Babson, and fundamentally, a number of us are driven towards seeking out the newest forms of innovation in the field. I feel privileged to be able to travel the world and look at what is now an emerging high-tech business model that's happening virtually any place in the world and often in unsuspected areas. So I'd like to share with you today a little story which is effectively a traveling around the world. I call it Innovation at the Edge of Electricity. To summarize, this is a collection of highly entrepreneurial business startups in some of the most poor and most remote nations on Earth, which are all now connected by a global internet and, more importantly, by a cell phone network. So if you bear with me, we'll just dig right in and I'll take you on a tour around the world. There are three key points I want to make this morning. The first is that we have had a massive expansion in global wealth in the last 15 years. To oversimplify, during the first 7 years of the 21st century, more people joined the global economy than existed in it at the end of the 20th century. What does that mean? It means there are several billion people who have come off of the farm or out of a barter economy into a fully monetized international economy. And I'll show you some of that data in a second. In addition, and this is the really big deal, in less than 15 years, literally half of the human population on Earth is now online every day. Now, online to most North Americans means being on the internet on a PC, but I'll show you today that the primary mechanism for getting online is the cell phone, and if we include the cell phones in the worldwide technology, we see that literally half the human species is online every single day. And third, this combination of wealth and connectivity means that we are experiencing a fundamental shift in the sources of innovation in high technology away from North America and Western Europe to a distributed group of people in the billions all over the world. Let's look at some of the information that backs this up. First of all, a quick view at the expansion of international wealth. This is the expansion in GDP for the past 100 years, and as you can see here, there's been an incredible run-up since the end of World War II. The bottom line there is the population of the world, and most of us feel this in terms of things like the dot-com expansion and the technology boom of the past 20 years, but not a lot of people realize that this is a global expansion. Let's go a little bit more detailed. It's very often thought that there's a rich part of the world and then a poor part of the world, and that's still true to some extent, but the biggest trend of the last 15 years has been an absolutely amazing growth in a global middle class. Here's some data from Gapminder for you to look at. This is from the 1970s, and there are three countries represented here. This is the income distribution of the United States and India and China in 1970. So the size of the pile there is the number of people at those various income levels. Well, I'm going to animate this, and what I'd like you to do is to look at the intersection between the United States and China and India and watch what happens in 30 years. The overlap between India and China and the United States has been absolutely surprising. And if we went through more of the data on Gapminder, we would see that this is a global trend with only a few exceptions in Africa and Southeast Asia. Therefore, we have more people joining the global economy than ever before, and the world population is now dominated by a middle class, not by a rich and poor bifurcation. This begins to add up as we look further. Cash in this world is very, very mobile. And a number of us were sitting around one day and we asked, I wonder what happens to all the money that we send to China to produce things for retailers around the world. So that was about 5 years ago, and I've set out to start tracking some of that money, literally by traveling around the world. So we send hundreds of billions of dollars into China. And if you track where that goes, it goes primarily into the supply chain that China uses to buy materials, which means it goes to about 125 different nations. Most of those nations would show up in economic statistics as poor nations, but that is rapidly changing town by town. If you follow the money, what you'll very often find are places like this. This is the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. I went there looking for internet access, which is part of my job, to try to find out what kinds of internet access there is in remote locations. This is one of the areas in the world where no rain has ever been recorded to have fallen. So I figured if I could find internet access there, I can find it just about anywhere. What I did not expect were entire towns growing in the desert, and in this case, just over the horizon, which are rapidly growing new towns that look a little bit like La Jolla, California, and they're fundamentally coming from Chinese money seeking out copper and bauxite and other minerals in very high volumes. So the supply chain from China that acquires materials around the world is creating these pockets of wealth in 125 different nations. One of the characteristics of every single one of these pockets of wealth is that they are wired to the world internet and communication system with some of the most advanced technology in the world. What does that mean? It means people who live near that suddenly get cash from Chinese purchases in mining, but also access to the most advanced technology on Earth. In fact, in some cases, the communication technology is significantly more advanced than we have in North America. Right? This is a shot of the this is a composite satellite photo of the night sky. It shows who has electricity in the world and who does not. In the 20th century, most of the businesses in the world were driven by the high light areas you see here, the dense electricity areas. So most of the worldwide economy was driven from about 700 million to 800 million people who lived in these high electricity penetration areas. As we speak, the innovation has now shifted to what I call the edge of electricity, which is effectively in the dark spots all around the world. So those mining towns I showed you represent new sources of wealth, new sources of electricity, and also new points of connection to the international internet and communications networks all over the world, literally at the edges of electricity that you see in this map here. This is what I do for a living when I'm not teaching. This is someplace I was stuck with a rental car at the edge of electricity, and I literally will go out, look around for internet access and see what I can find. These days, it's easy to find an internet cafe. This one is one of the thousands in Africa. They're almost as common as telephone booths were in the old days, and there's quite a wide variety of them. So this is actually not a new thing, and it's a little bit standard at this point. If you can't find an internet cafe, you can almost always find a power line, and within 100 kilometers of that power line, you can probably find someone who knows how to rig an internet connection, IP, over the power line, so a lot of the people on the ground can get internet access using their own tools as long as they've got a power line accessible. This is a little crazy picture, but this is near the Arctic Ocean, and this is an electric generator working off of a small glacial stream. This is probably about 100 kilometers from the nearest town, but this is a source of electricity, and this is a fully satellite-connected outpost in the middle of nowhere with 4 people with extraordinarily high bandwidth. These are one of the photos I've been collecting of satellite dishes all over the world. This has been going on for about 30 years. There's some kind of satellite connection in the poorest neighborhoods everywhere on Earth, and that's really not a new thing. The last picture here I want to pay some attention to. This is a person across the street from one of the places I work in India. That bicycle is his house. That bicycle is his store. This is about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he's cooking his breakfast. There's no evident electricity around. I was standing there one day just sort of watching the street. He stood up and he pulled out a cell phone and he began to use it. And my first reaction was, well, that's pretty normal. And then I suddenly realized, where is he getting his electricity? And who is he talking to? So I won't take you through the whole story, but I had a friend who helped us translate back and forth. He thought I was stupid for not understanding where he got his electricity, because about 75 meters down the sidewalk, there is a white stand with a bunch of wires sticking out of it, and the various states in India have decided to give away free electricity in cell phone chargers to their people. They consider it a social good. So he would be able to find the adapter for his cell phone and charge his phone there. Now the second question is, what was he doing with the phone? Turns out that this is his store, and in about 2 hours from his breakfast time, this will fill up with thousands of people, and he has a steady group of customers. And he was ordering his 2 oranges and 4 pencils and whatever else it was that he would need for his customers on that day. Now here's the point. In a non-electrified bicycle in India, we have a just-in-time inventory system which is better than almost all of the just-in-time systems in North America. It operates on an hourly basis. It requires no fixed cost, and we have therefore an extraordinarily sophisticated business model in a place where it looks like there's nothing there. Multiply this times 2 billion people, and you begin to get the scale of this kind of innovation at the end of electricity. Let's move on further. Most of us in North America think that a cell phone is for voice. We're also the last place on earth that thinks you buy your telephone from a telephone company, and there's a lot of tradition behind that. Around the rest of the world, people know that the cell phone is not necessarily connected to the phone company. The SIM card, S-I-M, in the phone is the most important thing, and so even the poorest people on earth with cell phones are able to switch their cards around to buy prepaid cell phone access, to buy internet access. They can do this with flexibility that we do not have in North America. This is a billboard for the iPhone in Botswana. It was the first month that it was launched there, and as most of us know, the iPhone in North America is carefully locked up between AT&T and Apple, and if you try to hack it or jailbreak it, in the next software revision, they'll basically lock it down again. 75 meters from this phone, there were 2 street vendors in wide open view whose traditional business is to help you repair phones and upgrade cell phone software, and they could hack the iPhone in any way that you wanted it done within 75 meters in the first month of launch. The key point here is that in the poorest regions on Earth, we have a number of very, very sophisticated software developers that may have never gone to school. They do have access to the internet. They can get the instructions for everything that goes on here, and they can actually provide cell phone services that are faster, more responsive, and cheaper than most of the cell phone services in North America and Western Europe. This is another table nearby where you can begin to see the various parts of this. This person on this table can assemble you a custom-made cell phone for whatever you need out of the parts that he's got there. Up and down the street, every single vendor of vegetables and clothing and pencils also sells SIM cards and prepaid phone cards. So we have here in Botswana, at the edge of electricity, an extraordinarily sophisticated, totally modern communications business. And these users have significantly more choice in their internet communications than anybody in North America who buys a regular phone plan. If you don't like the bandwidth, you can also innovate the network. Most people in Asia and Africa know the Pringles can trick, which is if you buy a Pringles can and eat the potato chips, or if you find one, and then if you can get a cheap home networking antenna, if you stick the antenna in the can, it will boost a wireless signal from about 100 meters to 750 meters. Now, given that a lot of wireless is unprotected around the world, this means just about anybody with a little bit of knowledge, a Pringles can and a wireless antenna can rip bandwidth from open wireless, usually from companies or rich people in the area, and pass it around the neighborhood. Most people do not object to this because it tends again to be a public good. It's like a public utility. Even more sophisticated is the picture on the other side, which is a soup can. Big point here is these people innovating at the edge of electricity, because they have access to the internet, have instructions on how to improve their technology. In this case, if you buy exactly that soup can and locate the antenna with greater precision, you can boost a wireless signal not just to about 700 meters, but to about 1.5 kilometers if you do it right. The point here is that even if the people on the street do not have a wireless router themselves, they can take wireless signals and extend them across the countryside. It is common to see clinics and small factories as well as houses all throughout Africa and Asia extend bandwidth this way. This is one of the ways that you can take bandwidth from people who can afford it and distribute it to people who can't. And again, it's an open system that's considered part of the public good. So they can extend the technology, right, of a few entry points to the internet for a very long area. If you look at this edge of electricity in terms of the business growth there compared to ours, it's on a good year. New business growth in the economy in North America and Western Europe is probably about 5%. There are companies that grow much faster, but on average, we're a pretty mature economy. That's our growth rate. The businesses I've been talking about here grow much faster. They grow at rates of 10 to 50% and even higher. I'll show you an example of Grameen Phone in a moment, and the growth rates there are in the several 100% at a time. This is an example of cell phone banking in Africa, which is actually more advanced than any cell phone banking in North America and to almost a similar extent in Europe. Why? There is no infrastructure for banking in Africa. If you carry money in your pocket or if you go to an ATM machine, you have now marked yourself to a thief as a target for theft. So carrying money has an extraordinarily strong consequence, and therefore people are motivated to use their cell phones for online banking, and the banks locally who are not restricted by large regulatory bureaucracies have experimented with this, and they now have some of the most reliable banking on the planet. Now you may ask yourself, how do these people get all these cell phones if they don't have a lot of money? One of the things we tend not to notice in North America and Western Europe is that we buy about 1.2 billion cell phones every year, and 60 to 80% of those are recycled within 18 months to the developing areas of the world, which means a smartphone you bought for $200 is now selling in India 18 months later for between $14 and $23. A unlocked phone that you might have purchased for about $200 might be selling for 85 cents to a street musician in Africa. This penetration of cellular devices means things like wireless banking can be used quite reliably in some of the most remote locations in the world. Another thing that we're starting to track now is migrant workers, which are all over the world, moving around to construction sites, send their money back home, and they don't send it back home by mail. They don't send it back home by banks. They send it back in electronic remittances. This data is from 2006, and at that point, the formal remittances were over $300 billion a year, which represents a significant portion of the receiving country's home income. So guest workers in Dubai, Latin America, Costa Rica, North America are sending their money home outside of the regulated banking business using basically wireless phone connectivity. This is an example of a street musician, or in this case it's actually not a street musician, but this is an example of a local musician who has learned how to monetize her work on the internet. So the basic scenario that you can see millions of times is a musician who would normally be working on the streets or working in a subway station gets an 85-cent cell phone that records MP3s. They can rent space on a dial-up line for pennies, so they don't have to have an internet connection, and they can upload 4 of their songs for free to MySpace or Facebook, and they're searchable on Google. Now what this means, and this is a real musician here, this musician will now have a global audience. So they have moved from street corner or a small club to global audience through a rented dial-up line using the resources of Facebook and MySpace that all the rest of us do. But beyond that, the word of mouth goes across the internet to the musicians everywhere saying, don't take the monetization models of the big websites. There are 30 or 40 smaller websites that will sell your music and give you a much higher share of the profits. Here's one of them there called Noisehead. So we got basically a music business working from the bottom up which in 2006 we could count as about 30 or 40 million musicians. It's now clearly in the hundreds of millions of musicians worldwide. This from the streets business model has now also changed to a video and movie model, and you can see any kind of media that you want coming from people at the edge of electricity all over the world, and they have figured out within less than 6 years how to monetize their quite substantial skills as an actor or a musician. This was one that struck me, literally struck me. HIV is a huge problem all over the world. I spent some time visiting clinics for a number of different reasons, and in one clinic I noticed that there were 9 nurse practitioners and 27,000 HIV patients. And my logistics calculations were, how can they possibly handle that? The other problem they have the most advanced antiretroviral drugs, but because the drugs need to be administered with precision, the nurses are required to maintain what they call adherence data. They must ensure that the children who take the ARVs do so on a time schedule. I was watching a long line in a clinic one day, and I saw one of the nurse practitioners working with a mother's cell phone. What she was doing was to program a customized drug alarm calendar for every single one of the kids. The alarm would go off. There were instructions in the calendar telling the mother exactly what to do. This absolutely floored me, because this is essentially applications development at the edge of electricity, which provides better health care and better electronic medical records than we have in North America. This single event that I'm talking about now is scaling up across most of Asia and India, where HIV and other diseases are a significant problem. It's absolutely amazing to me that people at the edge of electricity have advanced technology, which is in some cases illegal in North America, and therefore they get better customized health care. Grameen Phone is an example that any entrepreneur in the world needs to look at. It's a very complex story in some sense, but it basically combines microfinance and a very sophisticated business model that had people in the towns borrow money for sets of 2 cell phones. Now, why 2 cell phones? The simple answer is 2 cell phones is a telephone company. With 1 cell phone, you have nobody to talk to, but if you've got 2 cell phones, then you can figure out how to do business models such as weather forecasting, commodity pricing, and things like that. Grameen Phone has expanded rapidly to more than 10 million subscribers. It is one of the highest return on investment businesses in a poor area like this. One of the reasons for the high return on investment is that a single cell phone can provide access to 1,500 people. In North America, we think of 1 phone, 1 person. We have to charge that 1 person a lot of money to make money off that phone. A used cell phone, 85 cents or $1, with time sold to 1,500 people in a poor region like Bangladesh, has returns on investment that Wall Street would envy and probably will never obtain in the advanced economies of the world. This means we have not only widespread business models that rapidly deploy, that are very modern, but they have extremely high rates of returns, which investment bankers in Asia and Africa have identified and take advantage of for growth. This is a recent example during the Haiti earthquake. It took about 3 days for the bureaucracy of the advanced countries to get various forms of aid in there. The military was there pretty quickly. This is a website called Ushahidi. It was basically started from the ground up. It's built off of the cell phone network that already existed in Haiti. About 60% of the population was online. And it was administered, if I recall correctly, largely by students and volunteers out of Boston. But the main way it worked was anybody with a cell phone, which was still working, could point on a map, could make an alert on a map for where there was help, where there was aid, people to stay away from, things to watch out for, scams to not get involved in. And this happened about 3 days before the major aid organizations from around the world got into Haiti. This is a clear example of high-tech, user-assembled, high-value networks at the edge of electricity. And this was such a strong demonstration project that development authorities around the world are now looking at this as a low-cost way to expand economic development and aid in the hands of the users around the world. So in closing, this may sound a bit strange, a bit out there, a bit extreme to some. It's really not magic. It's fundamental human behavior. Innovation, entrepreneurship are basic human drives. Tiny human innovations like the ones that we've looked at here are the natural sort of thing that people do every day if they don't have a lot of resources and need to develop their economy locally. Multiply that times 2 billion humans at the edges of electricity who are now wired to some of the best technology in the world, right? And you now have extremely high return on investment, fast growth, new business models outside of the traditional centers of innovation with very low fixed costs because they basically don't have a lot of resources to waste, and they stay focused on fast, swift, socially sustainable innovation. To me, this is a very optimistic message, and we all have an amazing future in front of us.